Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for a panel discussion on the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act and its implications for cannabis in New York. I'm Sarah Samuels, the Programs and Communications Manager here at ABNY, and I'm so excited to present this event today to you. We've had a lot of interest over the years for this type of event, and we couldn't, pick a more timely moment than now to do it. And we're so lucky to have all of these amazing experts to share a little bit more about it, answer your questions, and be here today. Before I kick it off and introduce our introductory panelist, I just would like to remind everyone to spread the ABNY word at A Better NY on all social media accounts. And also just encourage everyone to sign up for YP Associates program. It's our newly launched membership tier of the ABNY Young Professionals network, and it's a really great way to get more involved in ABNY YP. So with that, I'm really excited to introduce Jordan Isenstadt. He's currently heading Marino's Cannabis, Higher Education, and Public Affairs Practices, but you may know him as a former Deputy Director of ABNY. We're so lucky to have him today. He's worked with some amazing companies and leading their strategic communications program. And he's also a regular contributor in various cannabis and policy media outlet space. So we're so lucky to have him today. He founded the Cannabis Media Lab and sits on the board of advisor of the CBD and Cannabinoid Industry Association. He was also recently recognized as one of 2022's Cannabis Industry Power Players for Politics New York and AM New York Metro. So with that, thanks again, Jordan, for joining us. I'll pass the screen to you.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, ABNY, for having me today. Appreciate that introduction. You basically took my first two paragraphs of my remarks, so thanks for that. Anyway, welcome to the ABNY Young Professionals panel discussion on the state of cannabis. Real honored to be here. As Sarah mentioned, I'm a former deputy director of ABNY. I was with the organization from 2008 to 2014, and I was involved with the creation of the original Young Professionals Committee, and really thrilled to see that the YP group is still going strong. But I'm really pleased to be with you today because it gives me a chance to talk about my favorite thing, cannabis. And so with that in mind, I'm going to offer a few minutes of kind of framing remarks and then introduce the panelists, and looking forward to a great conversation. One of the great lessons that I got out of my ABNY career was to learn from political and governmental history. So I thought the best place to start was kind of a little history lesson about how we've gotten here. So cannabis was initially restricted to prescription only in New York State over 100 years ago in 1914, and it's been deemed completely illegal since 1927. In the 1940s, when Mayor LaGuardia was mayor of New York, he actually created a committee to look at cannabis usage, and that committee actually concluded that the gateway theory was false. And there was a moment there where there was hope that cannabis might be legalized in New York City, believe it or not. But unfortunately, the FBI and other entities really sought to bury that report. In 1973, only a couple of years after the federal government declared the war on drugs, cannabis was included in the Rockefeller drug laws, which increased penalties for sales and possession to a minimum of 15 years in prison. A few years later, in 1977, cannabis possession was partially decriminalized in an effort led by soon-to-retire Assemblyman Dick Gottfried, but possession in public view remains a misdemeanor until 2014, which unfortunately led to hundreds of thousands of arrests. In 1977, Dick Gottfried, again, introduced the predecessor to the Compassionate Care Act. That's the medical cannabis law that we all know now, which was finally signed into law in 2014. So as a result of that law, the Department of Health created the medical cannabis program, and they selected 5 cannabis operators known in New York as registered organizations to create a vertical cannabis entity with the ability to open 4 medical cannabis dispensaries and 1 cultivation site each. Vertical meaning they cultivate, process, and sell medical cannabis to medical cannabis patients. In 2016, 5 more registered organizations were selected by DOH. And so now all in, there should be 40 medical cannabis dispensaries around the state and 10 cultivation sites. I wasn't able to totally verify that, but that is what I believe is the case. Until recently, thank you, Patrick. Until recently, the medical cannabis program was considered to be one of the most restrictive in the country, but that's changing. In 2018, Governor Cuomo's long-held opposition to cannabis legalization suddenly started to fade away, and he instructed DOH to study legalization. That same year, my former boss, State Senator Liz Krueger, reintroduced the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act. I think for the rest of this conversation, let's just call it MRTA, or I know some people call it MRTA. And it was taken seriously that year for the first time. At the end of that session, this is back to 2018, there was real hope that that MRTA was going to pass. All the advocates got together. Nikki was probably there, but it didn't get a vote. Governor Cuomo included his own version of the MRTA, which he called the CRTA, in his 2019 budget, but again, it didn't come for a vote. 2020 kind of doesn't count because of COVID, all efforts stalled. And so then all came down to the 2021 session. Governor Cuomo came in strong with his own CRTA proposal for the third year in a row, but he simply had no leverage. So by late March, the legislature passed and the governor signed the MRTA. So in addition to regulating the taxation, cultivation, and sale of recreational cannabis, the bill also set a lofty goal of ensuring that half of cannabis businesses qualify as social equity businesses, meaning that their proprietors come from communities affected by the war on drugs, as well as women, veterans, and disadvantaged farmers. There was a great deal of excitement after the passage of the MRTA, where it'll be year anniversary pretty soon, actually, but largely due to some scandals in the governor's office and kind of a lack of urgency, the program stalled. So for months, there was inaction as we waited for the governor to appoint leadership to the Office of Cannabis Management and the Cannabis Control Board. Finally, on September 1st, Governor Hochul answered our collective prayers and nominated Chris Alexander for executive director and Assemblywoman Tremaine Wright for chair of the Cannabis Control Board. Slowly but surely, the OCM has been getting operational, the CCB has been meeting regularly, and over the last few months, they've made some substantial changes to the medical cannabis program, including allowing for the sale of whole flower, and they approved the long-awaited cannabinoid hemp program. On the local level, the last few months of 2021 were largely focused on what I called the great opt-out debate. As part of the MRTA, localities were given the right to opt out of retail and consumption, social consumption, before December 31st. I sat on a Town of North Hempstead cannabis task force, along with one of our esteemed panelists, and I got to see the process play out right in front of me. It was really fascinating. Ultimately, 10% of cities across the state and about a third of municipalities ended up opting out. But to be clear, municipalities that opted out can still opt back in. 2022 is set to be a big year for the OCM, so no pressure, Patrick. The agency is expected to publish draft regulations at some point over the next few months, which will provide more details on licensing and licensing types. That's everything: cultivation, retail, processing, delivery, social consumption, etc. There will be at least one comment period, possibly two, before those regulations are finalized. And then once all that's done, we expect the OCM to publish the license application, which many of my clients and many of the folks that other people here work with are anxiously awaiting. Just a few weeks ago, we also got some pretty exciting news about the program when the legislature fast-tracked and Governor Hochul signed a bill that allows for New York State's hemp farmers to start growing cannabis crops in the spring. So that's a really important step forward. So kind of took it from 1914 until today. Crazy times that we live in, but really exciting. In terms of, as someone who's sort of an informed observer, some of the things that are on my minds and things I think will be addressed in this panel, start with, we're all kind of anxiously waiting and speculating for a real timeline for regulations dropping, applications opening, and sales launching. You can get, depends on who you talk to on what day, you can get different answers. Inquiring minds also really want to know what the social equity program is going to end up looking like. I've been thinking about the future of the medical cannabis program. Will there be additional expansion, or will the recreational market sort of cannibalize the medical market as we've seen in other states. And then finally, workforce development is a big topic that I've been thinking about. I know others here have as well. Projections indicate at least 50,000 to 75,000 jobs within the next few years. It's a pretty significant industry here. So that's your history lesson. There's going to be a pop quiz later. Now I'm going to introduce the moderator and the panelists. Amber Littlejohn will be your moderator today. She's the executive director of the Minority Cannabis Business Association, where she leads the growth and expansion of MCBA and its policy and programming initiatives. Jamie Ansorge is a principal with Cozen O'Connor Public Strategies and counsel with the Cozen O'Connor law firm. He's worked deeply with several cannabis companies in New York State and been engaged with legalization efforts and policymaking. Nikki Kateman is the political and communications director for Local 338 RWDSU UFCW, a labor union representing 13,000 men and women working in a variety of industries throughout New York State and New Jersey. She handles legislative advocacy and government relations and was involved with the coalition that helped pass the MRTA. Patrick McKeague is the first deputy director at the New York State Office of Cannabis Management, where he manages the operational logistics associated with implementing the MRTA and creating the OCM. And then finally, Shanita Penny is a cannabis legalization advocate, strategist, and entrepreneur, and she's a founder and CEO of Budding Solutions, a boutique cannabis business strategy firm that helps clients establish and scale compliant, successful cannabis businesses. So I'm done. Enjoy the show.
Well, thank you, Jordan. And thank you for actually doing the work of that first question, which was to have everybody introduce themselves. So we will get right to it. I'm actually going to switch things up a bit and start with Nikki, because I think this is a really good foundational question. Sorry to surprise you, Nikki. So you recently co-authored an op-ed with Jordan about cannabis being a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for New York. What does that mean, and an opportunity for whom?
So thank you so much, Amber, and thank you to everyone here today. To give a little context, and apologies if I'm echoing, I'm in a classroom currently. So to give some context, Local 338, and as Jordan mentioned, represents 13,000 working people. And amongst that membership is a growing group of workers in New York's cannabis industry. We currently represent 80% of the workforce, and our members work across the entire supply chain. So if you are currently a certified patient, or you've been to a dispensary with somebody who's a certified patient, there's an 80% chance that the person you talk to at the counter is a member of Local 338, and the product that you purchased was cultivated, manufactured, and distributed by somebody that is a member of our union. So in terms of the question, I think this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, basically from the top to the bottom, right? The MRTA being centered in social justice is really critical, because it means opportunity for ownership and creating a robust social equity program that we're going to get it right. I'm going to say it. We're going to get it right in New York, right? So it's an opportunity for ownership, but presenting from the worker perspective, right? That is where my heart is. This is an opportunity for creating equity and generational wealth for workers, right? When New York really got serious about creating a cannabis industry, both in the medical program and now an adult use program, the last thing anybody wanted, from the labor movement to the legislature to advocates, was creating another industry that was really part-time minimum wage jobs, right? And these are, we're talking about jobs that, frankly, at the dispensary level, right, we're not are skilled jobs, right? All work is skilled, but this is an industry where work really is skilled, whether you're in the facility or the dispensary or you're doing deliveries, right? So we wanted to make sure that the jobs created in this industry were opportunities for people for good wages, good benefits, but we're developing a program that looks at workforce development and recruiting from communities that have been left behind from opportunities for good jobs, right? Who have been barred from advancement up the economic ladder because of prohibition of cannabis and conviction histories that they might have because of unfair drug enforcement of drug policies. So this really is a space where we are creating opportunities for generational wealth for communities, whether you're an owner or whether either you don't want, that's, not everyone wants to own a business, and that's perfectly okay. And we should be supporting the people who don't want to own businesses, right? And they can go to work and know that they are doing a job that they love, that they feel invested in by their employer, and that they are invested in the population of people that they're provide either selling products to, or growing or cultivating or extracting products to. So this is really an opportunity to create an industry that looks like the state of New York, and frankly values New Yorkers. And it's a really exciting time to be in this space and to be talking about how we create an industry that works for everybody, because that doesn't always happen.
Thank you for that, Nikki. Moving on, Patrick. Right down the road from the state of New York, we have New Jersey, and New Jersey is coming online, and there have been some pitfalls and some challenges. So I would love to generally hear from you. What is the difference between the approach New York is taking and the approach New Jersey took? And specifically on the issue of opt-outs, but also generally, what are some of the differences in how the program is rolling out?
Yeah, definitely. And that's like such an interesting question to look at, comparing how different states really, approach this topic of legalization. But first off, just want to say thank you for having me. It's really great to be here, and shout out to Jordan. That was an awesome summary of the MRTA in the past, 80 years. I think we should put it on the cannabis website as a helpful kind of learning tool. So very, very helpful there. And just a quick background on myself. I've been working for the state now for the past 5 years. Started over at the Department of Tax and Finance, where I think my supervisor kind of just gave me like it was end of summer kind of research job. Hey, what happened if we actually did legalize? And one thing led to another there. Ended up hooking up with some great folks over at the governor's office to help draft the legislation, and then spent the previous 2 years at the Department of Health in the medical marijuana program. And then when the bill passed and the OCM was created, I came over here. So it's been a really, really exciting time. Like Jordan mentioned, we really didn't get a chance to get started until October, just because the way the bill was written, it gave all the power to the board in terms of hiring employees, entering in the contracts, this and that. So the first 5 months have really just been like finding office space, hiring people, buying furniture, stuff that I do not like doing very much. But I think we're finally starting to turn the corner there. We're really getting back into like the policy development, which is the most exciting part. So I anticipate and know we'll have a lot of updates to share in the near future. And we do have a board meeting tomorrow, so hoping that will generate some good buzz. So please check that out. There's information on our website and how to view that. But back to your question. The opt-out is really interesting. So in New York, the way the MRTA had it is it required all municipalities, cities, towns, and villages to opt out by December 31st, 2021 for 2 specific license types. So they only were allowed to opt out for retail dispensaries and on-site consumption licenses, which we've been kind of thinking of similar to like a bar for alcohol. So that's one difference from other states. Some states allow you to opt out of all license types. So I think that gives a little bit more flexibility, especially thinking, upstate or areas where people might want to be doing a lot of cultivation, where they may not be that interested in having a dispensary. They can still have a grow location or a processing center or another license type there. And the other thing we kind of learned looking at other states was to make it an opt-out and not an opt-in. So municipalities have a little bit more flexibility. They don't necessarily have to take a stand if they are a little hesitant. I witnessed some of those town board meetings, and they were very interesting. It can get kind of contentious sometimes. But what we actually found is the data was pretty, I guess, low opt-out compared to other states. I don't know if that's because we're a little later on in terms of legalization. Like even states like California and Colorado have opt-out rates that are higher, above 50%. And New Jersey in particular, I think I've seen they're at 75% of opt-out for their local municipalities. So really interesting there. I think the feedback we've received in terms of why people are opting out, a lot of it is just because the rules and regulations aren't out yet. So they're waiting to see what those look like. As Jordan also mentioned, a municipality can opt back in at any time. So we're hoping that when we do issue the regulations and people get a better understanding of the rules of the road and what to expect, that there will be some more uptake. But for the most part, we do believe that there's a lot of people who did opt in, and there's a lot of opportunities for the market across the board. And we are working on a GSI map to try and get that on our website. So try and just make it a little bit more visual so you can see who's opted out, who hasn't. I'll also plug the Rockefeller Institute. They have a great opt-out tracker that is a pretty good resource to check out if you haven't, to see if your municipality has opted out.
I think it's really interesting. I want to stay with you for a second that your opt-out rates are so low. How much control do the local governments have over what the cannabis industry looks like? Because I find that as local control increases, then there is opportunity shopping. So looking for the biggest anchor and the most revenue and job creating opportunities, which sometimes is not awesome for small businesses. But how much control do localities have over the regulatory framework?
Yeah, that's a great question. And one I think we're kind of figuring out as we go a little bit. But the MRTA actually sets up the licensing process. So you receive the license from the state. There's no local license that you need to get, which is kind of different than Massachusetts. If anyone's been following the community host agreements, which have spurred some instances of not so great behavior on the terms of some local operators. But locals in New York do have control over what we call time, place, and manner. So things like hours of operation, and then the zoning of where these dispensaries and on-site consumptions and licensees can zone. So I know that's a big topic of concern for a lot of localities, figuring out, do they go where liquor stores are zoned? Is it more like a pharmacy? And so that's a really good question, and one we're hoping we can be a part of and help steer some people in that direction. But for the most part, those are really the major touch points when it comes to localities, and we borrowed heavily from the alcohol beverage control law in terms of what they can do with liquor stores to make it very similar to what it is for cannabis stores. One other quick one I'll mention is part of the application process for retail dispensaries and on-site consumption licenses. There is a opportunity for the local municipality to issue an opinion on whether or not they believe this licensee should get a license. And then in the city, it's the community board. So again, that mirrors what the state liquor authority does.
Wonderful. Thank you for that incredible insight. Shanita, we are going to carry on kind of with the topics that Nikki had raised. So you are both, you have some unique positioning because you are both an operator and a policy expert in this space. So you have some pretty unique insight when it comes to watching these things unfold. What do you think in terms of meeting the equity goals and the lofty equity goals that the state has set out? What do you think the state of New York can learn from other states that have rolled out? And just from where we are today in the rollout of New York, what do you think are some key things that need to be accomplished as the program is implemented?
Well, I am excited to see these lofty goals, right? You've got to aim high, and there is a lot of work to be done. So even achieving a portion of it and being able to learn from setting out to do so much, I think is it's an example that I've been waiting for a state to make. And so it's going to be important, right? If you want to see half of your licensees qualify, be social equity businesses. And when you think about that, it's not just awarding these licenses, it's all of the wraparound support that's necessary. And so earlier, someone mentioned, taking that very amazingly articulated history and putting it on the website. That is absolutely a first step in ensuring that we can achieve these goals, right? Why are we even setting out to do this? And helping folks understand how we got here. Because once we understand the history, we can better understand all of the touch points that we have to address in order to achieve these goals. And so, when you talk about labor, when you talk about tax revenue, when you talk about the application process and licensing, one of the things that you're learning as we go along is, even in the case of like a subject like opting out, allowing municipalities to come back when they're better informed is super smart. You've got municipalities that are going to opt out because there's just not enough information yet. And then you've got municipalities that, and someone mentioned Massachusetts earlier, that will leverage those holes and those gaps and not do it with the intent of helping anyone but themselves. And so it is just very important for us to look at what's been done throughout the country, to look at the things that are going to be specific to a state like New York, cities like New York City, and to think about policy with all stakeholders in mind, community players, folks that will be involved in the industry, and then the consumers as well.
Well, you're getting an amen out of me for all of that. Just so you know, I like to try and claim Shanita as my own. Shanita was president at MCBA when I started as a senior policy advisor. So I have had the pleasure of getting to work with her on some of these issues. I'm actually going to open this one up to the panel in general, because this, again, I think really kind of goes, is a continuation of the discussion with Shanita. And that is, what is the role that we see of the diverse communities that have been identified? What is going to be the role of them in the cannabis industry in New York? And how can the state, again, I think Shanita touched on it already, but what is their role and how can they go about ensuring, and how can the state and how can folks in the community offer support and be going about making sure that those individuals are included in the industry? So Nikki, I'm going to start back with you since you kind of started us off in that conversation. Sure. Feel free to jump in, anyone else.
Great. So I'll take the workforce perspective. So I think there are a couple of things we can be ensuring are happening, right? And I will say, just, to start, actually, let me start with the statute of the MRTA. The MRTA has given us a lot of tools that we haven't previously had, and that includes the requirement that licensees will need to issue reports to the state on the demographics of their workforce. There's going to be a 2-year look back period to look at what the workforce looks like, who's in the workforce, what the needs are, right? So we now have tools to be able to make sure that we are hitting equity goals at, at ownership levels, but also in the workforce, right? And I think what we can be doing, right, thinking through, and this is some of the things that, working on with Local 338 and some of our partners is, and I'll actually drop one of the partnerships we're working on in the chat, is thinking through workforce development, right? And how do we remove barriers for people? And that includes supporting legal education and services. We're talking about workforce development and training. We're talking about local targeted hiring and connecting folks to community-based organization. And by folks, I mean employers, right? People who are going to be opening businesses in this industry. They should be working with the community-based organizations to set up job fairs and recruiting and working through these different opportunities. Because as Jordan said, there's going to be tens of thousands of jobs. And there's no reason we shouldn't be tapping into talent and that exists in communities, but also, right, and I'm not going to gloss over the fact that there is a workforce in the legacy market that's already been operating. They're skilled. We just have to make sure that those skills are refined to be able to apply and work successfully in we'll call it the MRTA market space. So I think there's a lot that we can be doing, and I think the state can be working as, you know, a partner in a lot of the conversations, whether we're talking about workforce development, whether we're talking about, you know, even before somebody gets hired, setting up trainings for people so that they're familiar with cannabis before they, you know, walk through the door on that job interview. So I think there are a number of different opportunities we can be doing. And, you know, that's, you know, we have that with the social equity fund that the state's established, but we're also talking about this through the tools, the MRTA, to really hold people accountable.
I really just have to throw in here for the state of New York to give a little bit of credit. There are only 15 state level social equity programs in the country, and only 3 of them actually mention race at any point when it comes to either its definition or its qualifications. While not directly saying we want these races to get licenses, the fact that New York even mentions race is surprisingly rare, especially given what we know about who most suffered behind the impacts of the war on drugs. Jamie, did you have?
Sure.
I'm
Hi,
gonna
Amber.
pick on you.
Yeah, no, thank you. No, I want to chime in. I mean, Nikki covered the workforce side of this so well, and that's a huge piece of the puzzle. And, you know, I certainly encourage, especially non-social equity applicants, to have social equity plans that include working with, you know, folks in labor, working with training programs that engage communities that were impacted by the war on drugs. But the other side of this is the equity piece, as in the ownership piece of actually being licensed applicants. And the MRTA was crafted very carefully to ensure there are really maximum opportunities for social equity applicants, you know, as kind of Jordan laid out those parameters, you know, with this aspirational goal of half of all licenses being given to applicants that qualify as social equity applicants. That's a huge opportunity. But it's difficult. It's in particular very hard to raise capital. Starting a dispensary, the real estate, starting a grow is very complicated and expensive. You know, chartered banks are still not able to give loans because cannabis is a restricted narcotic, essentially under federal law. So I'm very hopeful that we'll pass safe banking or something at the federal level that will unlock financing opportunities to the communities that need it the most. But look, there's a huge opportunity here, not just in cultivation and dispensaries, but for all these license types, delivery, on-site consumption, where the MRTA has very specifically created many pieces of the pie, right? So there's a general ban on vertical integration so that, you know, there won't be just a small number of large companies taking kind of a vertical approach that will crowd out others. And you have, you know, a maximum of 3 dispensaries per applicant. So again, you know, with the idea that there's going to be hundreds, if not maybe thousands of dispensaries, that is, you know, there will be many pieces of the pie where hopefully at least half of those will go to social equity applicants. So it's a really exciting time. And hopefully we'll see some regulations shortly that will help folks to kind of plan their businesses and position themselves to get these licenses when they're available.
So Jamie, I'm sticking with you. So I've worked with the Cozen. I've worked with the Cozen folks, and I know you to be very sharp when it comes to policy. So I'm gonna touch on one point that you made, and that is about vertical integration. The current medical operators that will ultimately transition over will be able to vertically integrate. So what do you think is going to be key to everybody else who doesn't have the benefits of the economies of scale? How do we offset that? And what do you think we can put in place to make it easier for companies that don't have the benefits of scale that the big medical operators that will transition into adult use will have? What can we do to help them be a little bit more competitive when they're competing with people that are obviously going to get product a lot cheaper?
Sure. No, and that's a great question, Amber. And look, the ROs will have the option to vertically integrate. They'll have to pay this very large, you know, this fee, which, you know, we're still waiting to hear what that amount is, but that money will be used to essentially seed this social equity fund that is so important to then, you know, helping incubate and supporting social equity applicants. So I think it's all part of, you know, this kind of grand plan. There's many pieces to the puzzle. And look, I think the ROs are very important. You have to have, first and foremost, a functional market. And the ROs are most able to, at the outset, scale up and provide the supply in the dispensaries so that there aren't lines around the blocks as there were in Massachusetts, so that the state realizes the revenue that it needs to, again, reinvest in communities. So they are a very important piece to this puzzle, but they are still limited. They can only have about 8 dispensaries. They will be able to wholesale product to other dispensaries, which again is an opportunity for, if you're a social equity dispensary applicant, you have to source your product, and these ROs will, they know what they're doing. They're going to be creating world-class, very trusted product that consumers are going to want, and those are the types of products that these social equity dispensary owners may want to stock their shelves with. So I think it's complementary, and this was all hard fought on both sides, right? But I do feel that the state has struck a balance where there's room for everybody, and the ROs will ensure a successful market launch, and there will still be many pieces of pie for additional applicants. But hopefully it will be a symbiotic relationship.
Oh, Shanita, that means now I have to come over to you. So we have seen some of the challenges that exist when you're transitioning, when the existing medical operators provide the foundation for the industry. In Illinois, for example, that was the beacon of social equity, has 0 social equity retailers open, and the existing medical operators have had a 3-year head start. What can New York do differently as the existing medical operators transition over to, again, provide foundational, play a foundational role in the industry? What can we be doing to make sure that the advantages that exist on their side really don't make it challenging for all small businesses and new businesses that are coming into the market to exist?
Illinois is such a great example for a couple of things, right? Being able to flip the switch really quickly. And you had the medical operators that supplied for the adult use market. And like you said, they've had this 3-year head start. They generated a lot of tax revenue, though. And that tax revenue was earmarked for reinvestment into the communities impacted by the war on drugs. And so you had community organizations and groups that were benefiting from the cannabis tax revenue. So that's what they got right. And that's what we want to see done. We also don't want to see tax revenue overpromised. We talk about being able to get this market up and running quickly so that the state can realize this tax revenue. But we just should be really thoughtful about not over-promising and being realistic in what we're doing with that tax revenue so that we can truly show a return, so that we can show the reinvestment in the communities that were impacted. And then we have this fun part of how we manage, right, these and create these meaningful partnerships, whether they're public-private, whether they're small, big. We have to be intentional about what we are doing. Otherwise, this opportunity to help social equity businesses turns into just that, a head start. Folks are left in the dust. We saw social equity operators in places like California, Oakland, and LA specifically, that were left off in worse financial situations than they were before being awarded this opportunity of a lifetime. So without the appropriate resources, we are going to set these licensees up for failure. And then the money that we've invested in retail storefronts for them then just goes back to someone who didn't need an additional handout for their business. So we have to be, again, intentional and thoughtful about the programs that we're setting up, and then the roles that everyone's playing, government included. The most important thing I want us to think about is once these folks qualify for social equity licenses, let's treat them like the small businesses that they are. Let's really tap into the existing infrastructure and programs and treat these business owners and provide access to the wraparound support services that are necessary for them to not only survive, but to have a chance at thriving. Who wants ownership in an industry that leaves you, bankrupt, but you can't even file bankruptcy, right? These businesses are not the golden ticket that so many people have made them out to be. And while I am very excited and hopeful about what New York is setting out to do, we have to be smart about not further impairing and impeding the progress of a people that have already been impacted by prohibition, by being, just in these communities that were ravaged by the war on drugs, and just folks that have historically been disadvantaged. So, my main takeaway is, yes, let's create these programs that get as many people involved in this industry, but let's not just leave them hanging. This industry is tough to navigate when you're a savvy business investor, entrepreneur, business owner. Some of these folks are looking at this opportunity, and with the right guidance, with the right support, with the right investment, we can certainly make them out to be the, again, thriving business owners that we want to see in this space.
I think what you said about taxes was so important, because the overpromising, we are finding that the overtaxation, making it impossible to really outcompete the legacy market, overly burdensome regulation, overly burdensome barriers to entry. So when states like California, when you have people operating at a 70% effective tax rate, you can't exist like that. And some of the bigger companies can run at a loss, but small companies just can't, because they don't have backup. So now I'm going to shift gears a little bit and get back to the practical, and talking about folks who want to get into the industry. And I'll start with you, and then I want to open this up to the whole panel, since we have folks that I think have really broad expertise. What should people who are interested be doing in getting into the industry be doing right now to prepare themselves? Because again, we are still in the process of figuring out how things work and where we're going. But what can folks be doing to prepare themselves?
That for me?
Jamie.
Oh, sorry.
Actually, I'm getting you next if you don't volunteer. You definitely need it from you too.
I'm happy to start, or Shanita,
No, please,
whatever you
Jamie,
prefer.
go
Okay,
ahead.
cool. Sorry about that. I wasn't sure who it was for. Well, thank you, Amber, and that was so well said, Shanita. I mean, you're right. This isn't just some golden ticket. This is a really complicated, highly regulated business environment. And so, folks need to be doing what they'd be doing before starting any business, all the due diligence, creating a business plan, finding investors, working on your corporate structure, locking down the real estate you need for your operations, building relationships with the elected officials in the communities where you want to operate. Hopefully you're from that community, but especially if you're not from that community, those are all the things you need to be doing. But all the while, you need to be keeping an eye on what's happening with the rules and regulations, and you need to know what's in the MRTA very well, the different license types, the operational restrictions, the regulatory hurdles. We're about to enter what will probably be a 5-month period of rulemaking, publication, comment, republication. We'll see how long it takes, but everyone needs to follow that very carefully, because the devil and the opportunity will be in those details. And you're right, Shanita, that if you're not fully prepared for that environment, it will be hard to succeed, especially if you're a smaller business in the marketplace. So it is a tremendous opportunity, but not one that should be taken lightly. And we definitely need to make sure that, in particular, the social equity applicants have all the resources and support that they need to succeed and to make those business decisions and get those licenses. So well said. Thank you.
So Shanita, this is not, New York will not be your first, second, or third rodeo when it comes to getting up and running. So from the small business and social equity perspective, what are some unique considerations that folks that are in that category should be taking into account as they prepare?
Teamwork makes the dream work. And so when you talk about either leveraging an existing business to get into the space and support the cannabis industry, there's always that. But I also just really encourage folks to understand that this is an industry unlike any other. And if you're not willing to be that policy expert, that regulatory expert, you are going to have to build a team around you that includes those experts. And it's not only keeping up, but it's proactive, right? Because take it a step further, the federal government policymakers specifically are looking at what's happening in each of these states, and what we get right and what we get wrong are, all we have to go show them what we want and don't want from a federal regulatory perspective. And so I'm just going to encourage folks that are, again, interested in this business to think about all of the opportunities, to think of a little bit, outside of the box. I think New York is one of those places that, while other states are trying to figure out delivery, there's an entire legacy market that has that thing down pat, and partnering with the right folks that can have the political conversations, that can manage your compliance and regulatory. Those are the dreams that, those are the dream clients that I want to be putting together. So I would encourage you to, again, connect with folks that can build innovative businesses and support doing what's right to make this industry reflective of our community.
I'm going to toss in one extra thing, and that is, especially if you are small or anybody who is going to qualify under social equity, plan on a far longer rollout financially than is slated, because we have never seen a major market rollout and not have major delays due to litigation, wrangling, administrative delays. So if they say a year, plan on 3.
Yes, everybody.
So I want to put that out there, because it is heartbreaking to me to people get to the point where it's so close and they're trying to hold on, but they are delayed and delayed and delayed, and they end up losing their license or losing the opportunity. So, or I've seen people lose homes that they've leveraged. So again, as Shanita mentioned, being far worse off than folks started. I'm going to start making my way to some of the questions that have come in, because we have quite a few that came in advance, and then some that have come in throughout the discussion. And one of the questions that was either for myself or for Nikki, and I'm happy to start this one off, is how the medical operators having funds and potentially a head start will impact equity. They won't necessarily get a head start. It sounds to me, in just reading the policy tea leaves, that's a possibility. Other states have done that, where they have paid to have them enter. And how it impacts the rest of the industry will all depend on how the state does at counterbalancing the advantages that will come from vertical integration, a head start, economy, benefits of scale. Fortunately, the way the law was written, yay, all of you who worked on it, the opt-in issue really isn't as much of a challenge, but around the rest of the country, we see that additionally, the medical operators also have an oligopoly or a monopoly that's naturally created in the municipalities. So New York is already doing a much better job than states have in the past of lessening the impact. And it's really just, I think, about the regulators being mindful of what they've seen in the past and understanding just how much of an advantage these first mover advantages and the disparity in funding is, and working to offset that both in what the medical operators give and then also the support given to the small businesses. So Nikki, this was directed at both of us. So
and I'll just add to that, Amber, you answered it, I don't want to repeat what you said, but I will just add, I threw the article in the chat, and the New York Times just broke a story that the OCM and CCB will be, they'll be a priority for the first 100 dispensaries will be going to individuals with cannabis convictions. So clearly, the state is already thinking through, how do we give those who qualify for social equity an opportunity to get ahead in this market and build their business first. So that is the only thing I'll add to that, because it was perfectly timed for both this panel and for this question.
No, that's a beautiful thing.
It was like Patrick knew he was going to be on this panel.
Yeah, and thanks for teeing up that question, by the way. That was a beautiful segue for us there.
Before you go on, I'd like to encourage the state of New York to think about how we can leverage things like supplier diversity that we already use in government contracting to really ensure that these programs are beneficial and encourage diversity at every level of the supply chain. Because the product that's going to be made available to these retailers should, be diverse. And right now we know that while the medical market in New York was highly restrictive, it also, from a quality standpoint, creating businesses that are truly competitive, there will have to be some new suppliers in this market. And so if you start out there, I think it will lend itself to creating diversity throughout the supply chain. And again, creating those bigs and small in every level of the supply chain.
All right, I have a bit of an in the weeds kind of a question here about taxes. New York is doing things a little bit differently. Again, there is the THC tax. Can any of you offer a little bit of insight into the decision to go with the THC tax, and why not a flat wholesale tax? And so what was the reasoning and kind of thinking behind this choice?
I can take a stab at that one. So yeah, you're right. It's novel. It's a novel idea. No other state has really pursued a tax based on THC milligrams. Illinois kind of has a proxy in terms of taxing different subsets or forms of categories at different rates. But really, where I think the idea really genesised from was looking at kind of how we tax alcohol. Beer, wine, liquor, they're all taxed at different rates depending on the percent of alcohol in there. And so the concept there, I think it's called like a Pigovian taxation, but it's trying to tax what the actual content that the consumer is trying to purchase. So in this case, THC is in many cases what the consumer is purchasing in terms of trying to do it. And if the more THC in the product, most of the time it's more expensive because that's kind of the active ingredient. It's not perfect, which is why there are different rates depending on the different product. So flour is taxed at the lowest rate and an edible is taxed at the highest rate. And that's really because of the way THC metabolizes in the body. So a 5 milligram edible, those 5 milligrams is going to affect you a lot differently than if you inhaled those 5 milligrams from a flour product. So the idea of the different rates was really trying to just find parity between them. It is definitely, it's going to be, it's a new taxation. It's what we spoke to a lot of people who actually did not love the weight-based tax, especially early on in the supply chain on the cultivator level. There was a lot of complaints, particularly out of California, that this disadvantages growers, and it was kind of hard to administer from the state's perspective, just in terms of keeping track of everything and diversion, that type of stuff. So it is a new idea. We're working with our lab folks and the Department of Tax and Finance to roll it out. But always looking for suggestions and stuff of that nature on how to improve and continuously make sure that the market works for the people in it.
Shanita, you look like you had something to say.
Well, it's always really interesting to see each state's approach to this. And so when I think about this, especially from an adult use perspective, I think about when you look at alcohol, right? There's a harm to society that we are making, we are reconciling with these taxes. And I think it's going to be very important for us to specify that this isn't like alcohol. We know that it's less harmful than, and so those are the other considerations that we should be keeping in mind as we evolve on how we tax this. And it really is good to see this. And as long as it's adult use only, because I think about that higher concentration, I think about some of those other formats that essentially would be taxed higher, and that might target a patient population in a way that's detrimental to their access. And so the tax conversation, I am not an expert, but it is always very interesting to me. So I applaud the state of New York for hearing what operators, especially our farmers, have said in other states about that weight-based tax.
Well,
And that's a good point, Shanita. If there is federal legalization, all the state tax programs just need to be rethought, so it's going to be a fluid topic.
Yeah, and with state taxes ranging from 8 to 25% in proposals, I mean, that would be terrifying. Quickly, 1 or 2 lines from each of you on what you would recommend to a young professional looking to get into this space in some way or another. And so you are at the top of my screen, Jamie, so I'm going to start with you.
Sure. Thanks, Amber. It's a great question. I mean, I think everyone should think about, bite off a piece you can chew. A lot of people are, again, focused on cultivation and dispensary, but there are so many other opportunities, not all of which are plant touching. There are a number of ancillary businesses, software and cooking ingredients, and there are a million ancillary businesses where you won't even require a license, so you won't have to deal with as much regulation, that could still carve out a role for you in this exciting, hopefully $6 billion industry in New York. So if you're going to go for a license, Shanita said, you better come right. Like you gotta get your team together and know what you're doing, but think outside the box. Look at all the license types, delivery, on-site consumption, and think about other opportunities outside of those licenses.
All right, Jamie, I gotta push. You can always tell the lawyers and folks that we bill by the hour. Patrick, jumping to you.
Yeah, I mean, it's similar to what Jamie said. Really, I know so many people have a passion for this plant and this industry, and just to become a subject matter expert in whatever area you really like. I mean, what's the cliche? It's not work if you like what you do. So I 100% believe that, and encourage people to pursue opportunities and figure out what they want to do.
Thank you. And thank you for your incredible work on this bill. Nikki.
So I have to reiterate what both Jamie and Patrick said, because I come at this from an advocate perspective. And I'm, working with people who are working in this industry, right? There are so many opportunities in the cannabis space and the ancillary. And frankly, who knows what the future holds with this industry? There's going to be so many innovations we're going to see over the next, frankly, 3, 5, 10 years. So if you don't get into the space within the next year, don't think you're down and out, right? Because there are going to be countless opportunities, both in New York and, our neighboring states. And frankly, if the federal government moves, that opens up a whole new door of opportunity. So I think the opportunities are endless.
Last but not least, Shanita.
I like what everybody said. I am a firm believer that you should get in where you fit in, lend your talent, your passion, your resources to building things that you can be proud of and that you can advocate and tell people about as we look to legalize in other states, as we look to legalize and regulate at the federal level. The last thing you want to do is be someone who had the power to create and created something that is not doing good.
Right. Jordan, did you want to jump in here?
Sure, why not? I come at this from sort of the storytelling and narrative perspective of things. So what I always counsel my clients on is to kind of find their why and really know their narrative. It really shouldn't be about the money. It should be about the family member or their passion for the plant or whatever the case may be, and to really double down on that.
I would just say there is a lot. This is a new industry, so people coming from other industries have really valuable input. I come from the dietary supplement industry. I was an attorney in policy, so I was picking on Jamie out of love. So I came from the dietary supplement space. So for me, that translated in my regulatory experience there. So look at all of the moving parts at all levels of the supply chain and find the synergy synergies between that and what you're doing right now, and understand that the expertise you have now can carry over and make you an incredible asset to the industry. I am also going to drop in the chat, be a little bit self-serving here. The Minority Cannabis Business Association just put out our national equity report, which basically just covers what is going on in all of the states. And there is an equity map, which is a research tool there. So if you're interested in kind of what's being done in other states and looking at where New York sits in all of this, please take a look at that. We think it's an incredible resource, and New York really is really in a position to do great things and emerge as the leader in this discussion. So thank you all for your time.
Thanks so much. Thank you, Amber, for doing such a wonderful job moderating, Jordan for introducing it, and Nikki, Jamie, Shanita, and Patrick. We're so lucky to have you all and really hear from people that are in the weeds on this issue. And I personally learned a lot, and I know all of our attendees did as well. So thank you so much. This concludes our panel, and we hope to continue this important conversation offline as we continue to work through it. So thank you all, and we hope to speak soon. Have a